bunker isn't on any map I trust, but it's on 3 I don't, and that's how I knew it was real. I want to get one thing out of the way before I describe anything else, because it matters for what comes later. I am not an urban explorer. I don't have a YouTube channel. I don't own a respirator with a brand name people argue about in comments. I'm a 34-year-old residential appraiser from outside Roanoke, Virginia, and the only reason I went into that bunker on the afternoon of March 14th was because a man named Curtis LeMay, not the general, a retired surveyor who lives 2 doors down from my mother, handed me a folded sheet of grid paper across his kitchen table and said, "If you ever want to see something that shouldn't still be standing, that's where it is." He'd circled a coordinate in the George Washington National Forest. He'd written in pencil, Sub-Installation 4, decommissioned 1994, sealed 1996, don't go alone. I went alone. That's the first thing I did wrong. It is not by a long margin the worst thing I did wrong, but I want it on the record early, because I've noticed that when I tell this story out loud, people fixate on it, and I'd rather we get past it. The drive-in was unremarkable. Forest Service Road, then a spur, then a rutted track that my Subaru handled the way a Subaru handles those things, which is to say grudgingly. The last quarter mile I walked. It was a Saturday mid-afternoon, 61 degrees, the kind of early spring day where the woods smell like wet pennies and old leaves. I had a headlamp, a backup flashlight, a multi-tool, 2 bottles of water, and a small notebook, because old habits from the appraising work. I measure things. I write down what I measure. It calms me. The entrance was where Curtis said it would be, set into the side of a low ridge that someone had clearly engineered to look natural and had, over 30 years, mostly succeeded. The door was the giveaway. Steel, painted the green-brown of a 1980s military motor pool, set into a concrete frame that had been deliberately rough-finished to break up its edges. There was a hasp where a padlock used to be. The padlock was gone. The hasp was open. I want to be precise about this because it's the first thing that didn't fit. Curtis had said sealed in 1996. He was very clear about the year. He'd worked the survey for the Forest Service that mapped the closure. He told me the door was welded shut along the top seam and bolted with a department-issue lock at the bottom. The top seam, when I ran my fingers along it, was smooth, not weld smooth, grinder smooth. Someone had taken the weld off, and they had done it carefully enough that they'd cleaned up afterward. There was no slag on the concrete sill, no discoloration in the paint. If you weren't looking for it, you'd assume the door had simply never been welded in the first place. I stood there for a long time, probably 4 or 5 minutes. I'm telling you that because in my memory, it feels like 30 seconds, and I want you to understand that I was already losing track of duration before I'd even gone inside. The door opened inward on hinges that had been oiled. I noted that. I wrote it in the notebook. Hinges oiled. Recent. I underlined recent twice, which is a habit I have when I'm trying to convince myself of something I already believe. Inside, the air was cooler than outside by maybe 10 degrees, and dry. That was the second thing that didn't fit. A bunker sealed for 30 years in the Appalachian foothills should smell like a basement that drowned. Mildew, iron, that wet concrete sweetness. This place smelled like nothing. Not nothing in the sense of clean, nothing in the sense of recently ventilated. There was a faint draft moving past my left ear, steady, the way you feel air in a building with working HVAC. I clicked the headlamp on and stood in the entry corridor and tried to be a reasonable person about what I was seeing. The corridor was maybe 40 feet long, concrete walls, concrete floor, a low ceiling with conduit running along it. The conduit was original. You could tell by the fittings, the kind of olive drab paint they used on military electrical work in the 70s and 80s. But somewhere along the length of it, maybe halfway down, a newer run of conduit had been spliced in. Gray PVC, the kind you'd buy at a Lowe's in 2019. I didn't touch it. I want credit for that. I didn't touch anything for the first hour. At the end of the corridor was a junction, 3 directions. Each was labeled with stenciled letters above the door frame, faded but legible. Admin to the left, mech straight ahead. QTRS to the right. Underneath the stencils, someone had written in what looked like grease pencil. Recently, the marks were sharp. A single number on each, 1, 4. And to the right where it said QTRS, the number 6. That stopped me, because QTRS should mean quarters, and quarters in a sub-installation this size would maybe contain 2 or 3 rooms, 4 at the outside. 6 was wrong. 6 was a number that didn't fit the building. I went left first, toward admin. I told myself I was being systematic. The truth is I was avoiding the number 6 because it bothered me, and I didn't yet know why. Admin was a short hallway, 2 offices, a larger room with the ghost rectangles of furniture on the floor where desks had stood for decades, filing cabinets, empty, drawers pulled out, a wall calendar from August 1993, the page stuck to the concrete by humidity that had since left the building, coffee rings on a metal desk, a black rotary phone with the receiver off the hook, lying on its side, the cord neatly coiled, which is not how you leave a phone if you're abandoning a building in a hurry, and not how you leave one if you're abandoning it slowly either. It's how you leave a phone if you set it down deliberately and walked away. I picked up the receiver. I don't know why. There was no dial tone, obviously. There was, however, a faint hiss. The kind of hiss you get from a line that has voltage on it but no signal. I put it back. I put it back exactly the way I'd found it, on its side, cord coiled. And I am telling you this because later I want you to remember that I did that. The mech room was locked, not modern locked. There was a hasp and a padlock, and the padlock was original, rusted through, the shackle frozen. Whatever was in there had been left in there. I made a note and moved on. I want to describe the moment I went into the quarters wing, because in my memory it's the cleanest break in the day. Before that hallway, I was a guy poking around in an interesting old building. After it, I wasn't. The quarters wing was longer than it should have been. I'm a residential appraiser. I know what 40 feet looks like, and what 60 looks like, and what 80 looks like, and the hallway in front of me was at least 120. The doors were spaced evenly along the right-hand wall. I counted them as I walked. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 doors in a sub-installation that should have had 3, maybe 4. The 6th door was at the far end, alone, on the back wall, perpendicular to the others. The first 5 were standard military issue. Flat steel, rounded corners, a small wire-glass window at face height, a stenciled number above the frame. The 6th was the same in every visible respect except that the wire-glass window had been replaced. The wire was gone, the glass was clear and clean, and the stenciled number above it, the 6, had been painted over the original stencil, which had been a different number. I could see the ghost of it under the new paint when I tilted my head and let the headlamp hit it sideways. The original number, as far as I could tell, was a 7, which meant the room I was looking at didn't used to be the 6th one. It used to be the 7th, and someone had decided at some point that it was easier to renumber the door than to explain what had happened to room 6. I stood in front of door 6 for a while. I don't know how long. I want to say 2 minutes. It was probably longer. Here's what I noticed in the order I noticed it. The door handle was clean, not polished, clean. The other 5 doors had handles furred with the kind of dust that takes a decade to settle and doesn't come off without effort. Door 6's handle had fingerprints. I could see them in the headlamp beam. The oil patterns where a palm had rested, where a thumb had pressed. They were not old fingerprints. Old fingerprints fade. These were sharp. The threshold under the door had been swept. The hallway floor was a uniform film of fine gray dust, undisturbed except in front of door 6, where there was a clean half circle, the radius of a door's swing, where the dust had been pushed aside by repeated opening. Repeated. Not once. Many times. The wire glass window, the new one, had a small smudge on the inside surface, inside, as in on the room-facing side, as in someone had stood on the inside of that door and looked out at the hallway and put their forehead or their hand or their cheek against the glass and left a mark, and the mark was fresh enough that I could see it was still slightly damp at the edges. And under the door, in the half-inch gap between the steel and the swept concrete, there was a thin band of warmer air moving outward into the hallway. Not draft, not HVAC, body warm, the kind of air that comes out of a room someone has been breathing in. I took one step back. I took another. I made it to the junction at the far end of the hallway, the one I'd come through, and I stopped there and listened, because I had become very aware that I had been making noise for the last 40 minutes. Footsteps, breath, the small clicks of my notebook, and that whatever was on the other side of door 6 had been listening to all of it. The bunker was perfectly quiet. And then, from somewhere behind me, deeper in the quarters wing, I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of a door handle turning. I want to be clear about which door. It wasn't 6. 6 was at the far end and I was facing it. The handle that turned was closer, one of the first 5. I couldn't tell which one in the moment, and I still can't, because I didn't go back to check. I left the bunker. I walked. I didn't run, because something in me understood that running would be a kind of answer, and I didn't want to answer anything yet. I walked back up the corridor, past the spliced PVC conduit, past the door with the ground-down weld, and I stepped out into the cold spring sunlight, and I stood there for a minute breathing like a person who had just remembered he had lungs. When I looked at my watch, it was 6:47 p.m. I had entered the bunker at 2:15. I had been inside, by my own count of what I'd done, for somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. The math on that is the part I keep coming back to. Not the door, not the handprint on the inside of the glass. The math. I am professionally a person who measures things. I had been inside that bunker by every internal account I could give of myself for less than an hour. The clock had taken 4.5. I didn't drive home that night. I want to explain why, because the reason matters, and because I've reconsidered it about 100 times since. I sat in my Subaru in the trailhead pullout for somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes after I came out of the bunker, and during that time, I made a decision that, looking back, wasn't really a decision so much as a refusal to make one. I told myself I was too rattled to drive the 2 hours back to Roanoke in the dark. I told myself I'd find a motel in Covington, get a few hours of sleep, look at the notebook in the morning when my hands were steady, and figure out what to do. The truth is, I didn't want to be in my own apartment with what I was carrying. My apartment has a hallway. It has 6 doors off that hallway: bathroom, 2 closets, bedroom, office, kitchen, pantry. I'd never thought about that number before. I thought about it sitting in the Subaru with the engine off and the cold creeping in through the firewall, and I decided I'd rather sleep somewhere I'd never slept before. I am not normally a man who counts doors. I had counted them twice before I'd even put the key in the ignition. Covington had a Days Inn off the interstate exit, and the woman at the front desk was watching a basketball game on a laptop and didn't look up while she ran my card. She gave me room 214. I want you to remember that number, 214, because it'll come back. I dropped my bag on the bed, sat on the edge of the mattress, and opened the notebook. This is the part I've thought hardest about how to describe. The notebook had 11 pages of writing in it. I had written by my count on 3. I want to be careful here. I'm going to walk you through it the way I walked through it that night, because if I just give you the summary, you'll think I jumped to a conclusion, and I didn't. I sat in that motel room for almost 2 hours going over those pages, and the conclusion came to meet me. Page 1 was mine. Hinges oiled, recent, the double underline, mech locked, original padlock, my handwriting, my pen, my abbreviations. Page 2 was mine. Conduit splice, gray PVC, estimated 2015 to 2020. Phone receiver placed deliberately. Calendar August 1993. Page 3 was mine mostly. The top half had my notes about the quarters wing, the count of doors, the measurements I'd estimated, the sentence door 6. Original stencil reads 7 under paint. That was where my handwriting stopped. The bottom half of page 3 and pages 4 through 11 were also in my handwriting. I don't know how else to phrase that. They were in my handwriting. The slope, the spacing, the way I close my lowercase a's at the top, the way I cross my t's with a little hook to the left. I have written in notebooks for a living for almost 10 years. I know my handwriting the way you know your own face in a mirror. The writing was mine. But I hadn't written it. Some of it was observational, like my own notes. Air temp 58 degrees Fahrenheit at door 6. No insect activity in quarters wing. Wire glass window installed within last 24 months, estimated by Seal and Cure. That last one bothered me because I don't know how to estimate sealant cure. I'm an appraiser. I look at kitchens and roofs. I have no idea what a fresh sealant looks like versus a 2-year-old one, and I've never claimed to. Some of it was procedural in a way I don't write. Approach door 6 from west side of hallway to avoid sightline through wire glass window. If door 6 opens during observation, do not retreat through main corridor. Use mech wing emergency egress. See figure 2. There was no figure 2. There was no figure anywhere in the notebook, but the reference was there in my handwriting, as if I'd drawn one and then torn the page out. I checked. No pages had been torn out. The notebook was intact. The perforations along the spine clean and unbroken. And some of it, this is the part I want to be most careful about, was in the future tense. On the second visit, bring 2 flashlights with separate battery sources. Curtis will not remember the conversation about the survey. Do not press him on it. Reintroduce the topic via the 1994 closure paperwork, which he filed personally and will recognize. Room 6 is currently occupied. Occupant is aware of observation. Do not vocalize within the quarters wing on subsequent entries. The wire glass window is not soundproof in the direction you assume. I read those 3 lines maybe 40 times. I want to tell you I did something dramatic. That I threw the notebook across the room, that I called someone, that I drove home in the middle of the night. I didn't. I closed the notebook. I put it on the nightstand. I lay down on top of the comforter with my clothes on and stared at the ceiling, and at some point I fell asleep, and when I woke up it was 4:30 in the morning and the room was very, very cold. The thermostat was set to 68. I checked. It read 68. The radiator under the window was warm to the touch. The cold wasn't environmental. It was the kind of cold you feel in a specific direction, the way you feel a draft from an open window without seeing the window, except there was no window open and the cold was coming from the foot of the bed. I sat up. The notebook was on the nightstand where I'd left it. The bedside lamp was still on. The room was unchanged in any way I could point to, but the cold had a shape. I want to describe this carefully because I don't want to oversell it. It wasn't a person-shaped cold. It was a standing cold. The way the air feels different in the few feet directly in front of someone, before you've consciously registered that they're there. I didn't move for a while. I could see my own breath faintly in the cone of the bedside lamp, but only in the air directly in front of me, not above the lamp itself, not toward the door. The cold ended in a clean line about 4 feet from the foot of the bed, and I could see exactly where it ended because that was where my breath stopped showing. Eventually I reached over and picked up the notebook, and I opened it to the last page that had writing on it. A new line had been added, in my handwriting. You don't have to go back. The notebook will keep working from here. I drove home at 5 in the morning, I-64 east, then 220 south, the sky going from black to blue to gray over the Alleghenies, and I tried to think about anything other than the bunker and the notebook and Curtis LeMay. I thought about my mother's birthday, which was coming up. I thought about a rental property in Vinton I was supposed to appraise on Monday. I thought about whether I'd lock the door of room 214, and then I thought about the fact that I didn't remember locking it, and then I thought about the fact that I didn't remember closing it either, and I had to pull off at a rest stop and breathe with my hands on my knees for a few minutes. What happened with Curtis is the part of this story that made me start writing it down for someone other than myself. The notebook had named him after all, and the notebook had been right about almost everything else. I went to my mother's house first. I keep some clothes there, and I needed a shower and to put on something that didn't smell like concrete. My mother was at her Saturday quilting group, which I'd known when I planned the trip. The house was empty. I showered, changed, made coffee, and walked across the street and 2 doors down to Curtis's place. Curtis LeMay is 76. He was a Forest Service surveyor for 41 years and retired in 2009, and the reason he and my mother are friendly is that he helped her contest a property line dispute with the neighbor on the other side back in 2014 and refused to take any payment for it. He is, in my experience, one of the most reliable men I've ever met. He remembers names. He remembers dates. He remembers which fence post he set in 1987 and what kind of soil was under it. He keeps his own field notebooks in a cedar chest in his garage going back to the early 70s. I sat down at his kitchen table the same way I'd sat down a week earlier, and I said, "Curtis, I went out to that coordinate you gave me." He looked at me. I don't know how else to describe what happened in his face. It wasn't blankness. Blankness would have been easier. It was a small, careful adjustment, the kind of adjustment a man makes when he's deciding how to handle a question he wasn't expecting. He set his coffee cup down. He folded his hands. He said, "What coordinate?" I waited for him to laugh or to clarify or to prompt me. He didn't. He sat there with his hands folded and waited for me to say something else, and I realized he was not pretending. He genuinely did not know what I was talking about. I said, "The bunker, sub-installation 4. You gave me the grid paper last Saturday. We sat at this table." He thought about it. He really thought. I watched him try to find the conversation in his memory and fail. And it wasn't the failure of an old man losing his grip. Curtis is sharper than I am on most days. It was the failure of a man trying to recall something that had not happened to him. He said, "Son, I don't know anything about a sub-installation 4. There's no sub-installation 4 in the George Washington that I ever surveyed. The closest decommissioned site I worked on was the relay shed up on Warm Springs Mountain. And that was 1988, and it was about the size of a tool shed." I felt the air in the kitchen do something funny. Not cold, just thin. I said, "Curtis, you wrote on the paper, in pencil, decommissioned 1994, sealed 1996. Don't go alone." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he stood up, slowly because his knees are bad, then walked into his living room and came back with a thin manila folder. He opened it on the table. Inside were maybe 20 pieces of grid paper, all of them with his handwriting on them, all of them dated, all of them filed in chronological order. He flipped through to the previous Saturday and pulled out a sheet. The sheet had notes about a property line near Buchanan he'd been helping a friend's son think about. Pencil, his handwriting, dated correctly. No coordinate, no sub-installation, no instruction not to go alone. He said, "I keep everything, son. You know that. If I'd given you something, it'd be in here and there'd be a copy. I don't lose paper." I believed him. That's the part I want to be honest about. I believed him completely. Curtis was not lying to me, and Curtis was not confused. The conversation I remembered having at his kitchen table the previous Saturday had not happened in his life. It had only happened in mine. I drove back to my apartment in Roanoke that afternoon, and I sat on my couch, and I took out the folded sheet of grid paper from my jacket pocket, the one Curtis had supposedly given me, and I looked at it. The handwriting was Curtis's. I'd known him long enough to be sure of that. The pencil was the soft kind he uses, the number 2 with the tooth marks near the eraser, where he chews when he's thinking. The grid paper was from the same pad I'd watched him pull pages out of for years. But the paper itself, when I held it up to the light, had a watermark in the corner, a small printed mark from the manufacturer. The watermark read, "MFG, February 2026. It was March 2026. The pad of paper Curtis had been writing on for 20 years had not, by any version of the world I could verify, existed long enough for him to have written on it before I drove out to the bunker. And underneath that watermark, in the same soft pencil, in handwriting that was unmistakably Curtis's and that Curtis had no memory of producing, there was a single line I hadn't noticed the first time, written so faintly I'd missed it under the coordinate. Second visit recommended within 7 days. I am writing this on the 4th day. I want to tell you I didn't go back. I want to tell you that the rational part of me, the part that pays a mortgage and files quarterly taxes and has, by any reasonable measure, a functioning life, won the argument. That I burned the notebook, that I called a friend, that I drove to my mother's and slept on her couch and let the 7-day window close without me in it. I didn't do any of those things. I'm going to be honest about that, because if you've stayed with this story this long, you deserve honesty more than you deserve a version of me that comes out of it well. What I did on the morning of the 5th day, was load the Subaru with 2 flashlights with separate battery sources, a pair of work gloves, a digital camera that wasn't connected to my phone, and a paper map I'd printed at the public library on a machine that didn't know my name. I left my phone at home, in a drawer, turned off, with the SIM card pulled out and sitting next to it. I told my mother I was driving up to look at a property in Lewisburg and would be out of cell range for the day. That part wasn't a lie exactly. Lewisburg is roughly the right direction. I want to be clear about why I went back, because I've watched myself construct 3 or 4 different reasons over the past several weeks, and I don't trust any of them completely. The reason I'd give you out loud is that I wanted proof. Photographs, measurements, something I could put in front of another human being and say, look. The reason I give you in private is that I wanted to know who was in room 6. The reason underneath that, the one I only admit to in writing, is that the notebook had told me I didn't have to go back, and I didn't trust the part of me that wanted to obey it. The drive up was different. That's the first thing I noticed. I'd taken the same route a week earlier. I-64 West, the Covington exit, the Forest Service Road, the spur, the rutted track. On the second drive, the rutted track was paved. Not freshly paved. Settled paved. The kind of asphalt that's been there for 10 or 15 years, with the cracks filled and refilled and the shoulder graded. I sat in the Subaru at the end of the spur for a long time looking at it. I'd walked that last quarter mile a week earlier. I'd photographed my own footprints in the mud at one point because the light was hitting them in a way I liked. The mud was gone. The track that had eaten my tires the first time was now a 2-lane access road with a faded yellow center line. I drove down it. I want to flag that, because it's the kind of detail that if you're hearing this story and not living it, sounds like the moment a reasonable person turns around. I am telling you that in the moment, sitting in my car looking at a paved road that should not have been paved, the wrongness did not feel like a stop sign. It felt like permission. The road had become easier between visits, and easier is not a thing roads do on their own. The bunker entrance was where it had been. The ridge looked the same. The door was the same green-brown steel, the same concrete frame, the same hasp without a padlock. The hasp was open. But there was a second door now. I want to describe this carefully. About 20 feet to the right of the original entrance, set into the same ridge, there was another steel door, identical to the first. Same paint, same frame, same weld seam ground smooth at the top. The hasp on this one was also open. The vegetation in front of it had been cleared in a way that suggested regular use. Not a path worn by accident, but the kind of clearing a maintenance crew makes around a hatch they need access to. I'd walked past that spot a week earlier. There had been no door there. I had photographed the ridge from that angle. I remembered doing it, and the photographs were on the camera I was holding in my hand, and I knew without checking that if I scrolled back to them I would see a smooth ridge with no door. I didn't check. I want to be honest about that too. I didn't check because I was afraid that if I scrolled back, the photographs would now show a door, and I would have to deal with what that meant. I went in through the original entrance, the one I'd come out of. The corridor was the same. The conduit was the same. The PVC splice was where it had been, but the air this time wasn't dry. It was humid in a specific way. The humidity of recent breath in an enclosed space, the way a bathroom feels for an hour after someone has showered. The temperature was warmer than outside, not cooler. The HVAC draft past my left ear was gone. At the junction, I stopped. The grease pencil numbers under the stencils had been updated. Admin still read 1, MX still read 4, but QTRS now read 7. I stood there for what was probably a full minute trying to decide what that meant. The number on the door at the end of the hallway last week had been a 6 painted over a 7. The number above the wing entrance now read 7. Either the wing had been renumbered to match what the door used to be, or... And this is the version I keep coming back to. The count had moved by 1, in a direction I didn't understand, and the building was keeping score. I went left first again, toward admin. Same routine, same systematic avoidance. I am aware of the pattern in retrospect. The admin wing had changed in one specific way. The black rotary phone was on the hook. I'd left it off the hook. I'd been very specific about that, both in my notebook and in my memory. I'd picked up the receiver, listened to the hiss, and put it back exactly the way I'd found it. On its side, cord coiled. The phone was now upright on the desk, receiver seated in the cradle, cord hanging in a loose loop over the edge, the way a person leaves a phone when they've finished a call. There was a small piece of paper under the phone, a note, folded once. I considered, seriously, walking out of the building at that point. I didn't. I picked up the note. The note was in Curtis LeMay's handwriting. It said, he came back. I told him not to. Tell him the 7th room is the one he wrote. I read it 3 times. I put it in my pocket. I went back to the junction and turned right into what was now the 7th wing. The hallway was longer than it had been a week earlier. I don't mean longer in the way that hallways feel longer when you're afraid of them. I mean longer by measurement. I'd estimated the first hallway at 120 feet. This one was, by the same eye, closer to 180. There were now 7 doors along the right-hand wall. The first 6 were the standard military-issue doors. The 7th was at the far end, perpendicular, where the 6th had been the previous week. The door numbered 6. The one I'd stood in front of last time. The one with the fingerprints and the smudge on the inside of the wire glass window was open. Not wide open. Open the way a door is when someone has walked through it and not bothered to close it behind them. About a foot of gap. The interior of the room was dark. The wire glass window was clean on both sides now. No smudge, no fingerprints on the handle. The dust half circle in front of the threshold had been swept away entirely, and the dust on the rest of the hallway floor had been swept too, in long, even strokes, the way you sweep when you're trying to make a place presentable. I want to describe what I did next because I've thought about it a lot, and I still don't have a clean explanation. I walked past door 6. I didn't look inside. I kept my head turned the other way, deliberately, the way you keep your head turned at a funeral when there's an open casket and you've decided you don't want that to be the last image. I could feel the room as I passed it. Not cold, not warm, just attended, the way a room feels when someone in it has stopped what they were doing to watch you go by. I had to consciously not slow my pace. I went to the 7th door at the end of the hallway, the new one, the one that hadn't existed a week earlier, and I did not let myself look back at the gap I had just walked past. The 7th door was closed. The wire glass window was clean. The handle was clean. There was no dust pattern at the threshold because there was no dust in this hallway anymore. The stencil above the door read 7. Underneath the stencil, in fresh grease pencil, in handwriting that was unmistakably mine, someone had written, "This is the one you wrote. Knock first." I stood there for a long time. I want to talk about what was happening in my head, because the rest of this account is going to depend on you understanding it. I was not in that moment frightened in the way I had been a week earlier. The fear had migrated. The week before I had been afraid of the building. Standing in front of door 7, I was afraid of myself. Of the version of me that had apparently been in this building, in this hallway recently enough to write in fresh grease pencil, and that I had no memory of being. The notebook had said room 6 is currently occupied. The note from Curtis had said the 7th room is the one he wrote. The grease pencil had said this is the one you wrote. 3 sources in 3 different hands, and they were not contradicting each other. They were converging. I didn't knock. That's the part I want to put on the record. I did not knock. I want to be unambiguous about it because what happened next has made me question whether I knocked and forgot, or whether the building counted my proximity as a knock, or whether knocking was never the actual threshold, and the rule had been written to make me think it was. The door opened from the inside. It opened slowly, not dramatically, the way a door opens when someone on the other side is being polite about it. The room beyond was lit, not by my flashlight. My flashlight was pointed at the floor, lit by an overhead fixture, fluorescent, the kind that takes a second to warm up and was already warm. The light was the wrong color for a sealed military bunker. It was the warm white of a residential kitchen. Inside the room, sitting at a small folding table, was a man. He was in his mid-30s. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, and the kind of hiking boots that have been broken in over years rather than purchased for an occasion. He had a notebook open in front of him on the table. He was writing in it. He looked up when the door opened and he saw me, and his face did something I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to describe accurately. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The kind of recognition that has relief in it. The expression of a man who has been waiting for someone specific and has finally seen them arrive. He said, "Oh, thank God. I was starting to think you weren't going to come back in time." I knew his face. I am going to give you the plain version because 4 weeks of rephrasing it hasn't made it any easier to hear. The man at the table was me. Not a stranger who looked like me. Not a brother I didn't have. Me. My face, my build, my posture. The small scar on the left eyebrow from a bicycle accident in 1998. The way I hold a pen with my thumb wrapped over the index finger because I broke that finger as a kid and it never set right. He was a few years older. Maybe 4, maybe 5. His hair was a little grayer at the temples than mine. He had a wedding ring, which I don't have. The flannel shirt was one I owned. The green and black plaid I'd bought at an LL Bean outlet in 2019, and that was, at that moment, hanging in my closet in Roanoke. He saw me looking at the shirt. He looked down at it, then back at me, and he gave a small, apologetic smile, the kind of smile you give when you've been caught wearing something that isn't yours. He said, "I know. I'm sorry. It was the only one in the closet that still fit me by the time I got here." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mouth was working, but no sound was coming out, and I noticed with a strange, detached clarity that my hands had gone numb in a way that wasn't about cold. He set down his pen. He closed the notebook in front of him, and I saw, before he closed it, that the notebook was mine. Same brand, same size, same chewed corner on the back cover where I'd worried it with my teeth during a long appraisal in 2023. He folded his hands the way Curtis folded his at the kitchen table. He said, "I need you to listen carefully because I don't have a lot of time and you have less than I do. I came back to tell you the second visit was a mistake. I'm the one who made it. I'm asking you not to make it twice." He looked at the door behind me, the way you look at something you're worried about. He said, "You need to leave now, not slowly, not carefully, now. And when you get back to your car, I need you to drive home, and I need you to pick up the notebook on your nightstand, and I need you to read what's written on the last page, the new last page, not the one you remember. There's something on it that wasn't on it when you left this morning, and you're going to need to do exactly what it says." I found my voice. Barely. I said, "Who are you?" He looked at me with a patience that wasn't entirely kind. He said, "I'm what happens if you knock." And then, behind me, down the hallway, I heard the door to room 6 open the rest of the way. I don't remember leaving the bunker. I want to put that on the record before I describe anything else, because every other gap in this account I've been able to reconstruct, at least partially, by going back over my notes and the photographs and the receipts. This one I haven't. The last clean memory I have of the second visit is standing in the doorway of room 7 with the older version of myself looking past me, and then the next clean memory I have is sitting in the Subaru, in the trailhead pullout with the engine running and the heat turned up to maximum and the dashboard clock reading 11:47 p.m. I had entered the bunker at approximately 9:30 in the morning. 14 hours, unaccounted for. My hands were on the steering wheel. The camera was on the passenger seat, lens cap on in the same position I remembered putting it before going in. My boots were clean. I want to be specific about that. They weren't just dust-free. They were clean, the way boots look when you've taken them off and wiped them down with a damp cloth and put them back on. The cuffs of my jeans were clean too. There was no dirt anywhere on me that I could find, and I checked carefully, including my fingernails, which are the part of a person that holds dirt the longest. I didn't drive home immediately. I sat in the pullout for somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes trying to find evidence of where I'd been. I went through my pockets. The folded grid paper from Curtis was still there. The note from under the rotary phone was still there, in the inside pocket of my jacket where I'd put it. The camera, when I turned it on, had 31 photographs on it that I didn't remember taking. I want to describe the photographs because they're the most useful piece of evidence I came away with, and because they're what I went home to look at, and because what I found on the last frame is what made me start writing this account. The first 12 photographs were ones I remembered taking: the exterior of the bunker, the 2 doors in the ridge, the corridor, the conduit splice, The junction, the admin wing with the rotary phone upright on the desk, the note from Curtis, photographed flat against the desk surface for scale, the 7th wing, looking down it, door 6 half open, door 7 closed with the grease pencil writing. The next 19 photographs I had no memory of taking. They were taken inside room 7. Some of them were taken from angles that suggested I had been moving around the room. There was a wider shot of the folding table, with the older version of me sitting at it, looking up at the camera with an expression of patient acceptance, as if he had agreed to be photographed but didn't want to be. There were photographs of the contents of the notebook he had been writing in, close-ups of pages, dense with handwriting, my handwriting, in pen rather than pencil. There were photographs of the walls of the room, which were lined with shelves I hadn't registered consciously, and the shelves were full of objects. I want to describe the objects carefully because they're the part I've thought about most. There was a wedding ring on a small dish. There was a child's drawing, a stick figure family, 3 figures, labeled in a child's handwriting, Dad, Mom, Me. There was a folded green and black flannel shirt, identical to the one he'd been wearing, on a shelf by itself. There was a small framed photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, mid-30s, laughing at something off camera, and underneath the frame the date June 2029. There was a stack of business cards with my name on them and a phone number I didn't recognize and a job title, Senior Field Inspector, that I have never held. There was a set of keys on a hook, 3 keys on a worn leather fob, and the fob had been embossed at some point with the initials of a property management company that, when I looked it up later, has existed since 2003 and has never employed me. The room, as far as I could tell from the photographs, was an archive, not of the bunker, of a life that had my face in it and that I had not by any measure I could verify lived. The last photograph on the camera was the one that made me sit down on my own kitchen floor for about an hour after I got home. It was a photograph of the inside of door 7, taken from inside the room, looking back the way I'd come. The hallway was visible through the wire glass window, and in the hallway, framed perfectly in the small rectangular pane, was a figure standing in front of door 6. The figure was me. I want to be clear about which me, not the older one, the one I am, the one with the build I have now, the haircut I have now, the dark blue jacket I had been wearing that morning. The figure was looking directly at the camera through the wire glass window with an expression I want to describe as curious, but the more accurate word is evaluating. The way a person looks at a door, they're deciding whether to open. The photograph was time-stamped 9:42 a.m. I had entered the bunker at 9:30. By 9:42, by my own clear and continuous memory, I had not yet reached the 7th wing. I had still been in the admin section, examining the rotary phone. I could not have been standing in front of door 6 in the 7th wing at 9:42, because at 9:42, I had not yet been to the 7th wing. Unless the photograph was telling me something I'm still working out how to say. I went to bed at around 2:30 in the morning. I did not, despite the older version's instruction, look at the notebook on my nightstand right away. I want to admit that. I was afraid of it. I had spent the previous 4 hours looking at evidence that I had been in a place I didn't remember being, doing things I didn't remember doing, and I was not in a state to take direct instructions from a notebook that had been writing itself in my own hand. I slept for maybe 3 hours. When I woke up, the notebook was on the floor beside the bed. I had left it on the nightstand. I had left it closed. It was now on the floor, open, face up, to a page I had not been on when I'd put it down. The page had a single line on it, written in my handwriting in pen. Curtis is at the door. Let him in. The doorbell rang. I want to slow down here, because the next several hours are the part I have been most careful about reconstructing accurately, and the part where I made the choice that everything after this depends on. I went to the door. I looked through the peephole. Curtis LeMay was standing on my front step in his Forest Service jacket, the green one with the patch on the shoulder, holding a manila folder. He looked the way he always looks. He looked tired in the way old men look tired in the morning. He saw me look through the peephole and he nodded slightly, the way you nod at someone you've come to talk to. I opened the door. He said, "I think we need to talk about what you're not remembering." I let him in. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table the way we had sat at his kitchen table a few days earlier, and he opened the manila folder and laid out in order 12 photographs. The photographs were of him, Curtis, at his own kitchen table, writing on grid paper, the dates printed at the bottom of each photograph, the way some older cameras print them, ran from January through March of this year. 12 photographs, 12 sessions, each one showing Curtis at his table writing on a sheet of grid paper that he had no memory of producing, and that, in each photograph, had a coordinate circled on it. The coordinates were all the same. He said, "I started finding the camera on my kitchen counter about 3 months ago. I don't own it. I don't know where it came from. It takes one picture every Sunday morning at 8:15, and it leaves the photograph face up on the counter the next morning. I haven't told anyone. I didn't tell you." I looked at him. He looked back at me, and his eyes were clear, and what I saw in his face was not confusion. It was apology. He said, "I knew you were going to come ask me about that coordinate. I knew it because I'd been watching myself write it down 12 weeks in a row without knowing I was doing it. I told you I didn't remember the conversation because I didn't, but I knew the conversation was going to happen. And when you sat down at my table last week and told me about a bunker in the George Washington, I knew you'd already gone, even though you were telling me you were about to go. I let you tell me anyway. I want to apologize for that." I asked him why he hadn't said anything. He looked at his hands for a long time. Then he said, "Because I didn't know if telling you would make it worse, and because, and I want you to hear this carefully, son, I have started to suspect that I'm not the one writing the coordinate. I'm just the hand it's using, and if I am the hand, then warning the person it's been rooting toward might be the exact thing it's been waiting for me to do." I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there is one. What we did next is the irreversible thing, the thing I cannot take back. We went to my office, which is a converted second bedroom with a desk and a filing cabinet and a window that looks out at a maple tree. I took the notebook out of the drawer where I'd put it after finding it on the floor. I put it on the desk. Curtis put the manila folder of photographs next to it. We sat down across from each other. I opened the notebook to the page that had read, "Curtis is at the door. Let him in." A new line had been added underneath it, in my handwriting, in pen. "Burn this notebook. Burn the photographs. Burn the grid paper. Do it together in the same fire before sundown. If either of you keeps any of it, the second visit becomes the first one. Do you understand what that means?" I read the line out loud. Curtis listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, I think I do." I asked him to explain it to me. He looked at me with the same patient kindness I'd seen on the face of the older version of myself in room 7, and he said, "It means it has a draft of you. Not the finished one yet. It's asking us to destroy the draft." We took everything out into my backyard. The notebook, the 31 photographs, the camera itself, the folded grid paper, the note from under the rotary phone. I had a small fire pit out there I'd used maybe twice. Before we lit it, I tore every written page out of my original field notebook, including the ones in my handwriting that I hadn't written, and added them to the pile. Curtis poured the lighter fluid the way a man who has built a lot of fires does it, sparingly. We lit it at 4:42 p.m., about an hour and a half before sundown. The notebook burned slowly. The photographs curled black at the edges, and the grid paper went up fast and bright, and Curtis and I stood and watched our own handwriting turn into nothing in the same fire. Neither of us spoke. About halfway through, Curtis said, "I want you to know that I don't know if this is going to work. I want you to know that I'm doing it anyway." I said, "I know." When the fire was down to ash, I poured water on it from a garden hose until the ash was a wet gray paste, and then I shoveled the paste into a metal bucket, and Curtis and I drove the bucket out to the James River and poured it into the water at a place where the current was moving fast. I want to tell you that I felt something lift when we did that. I want to tell you that I felt the building let go of me, the way you feel a tension in a room dissipate when an argument ends. I didn't feel anything. I drove Curtis home. We didn't talk much in the car. When I dropped him off, He stood in his driveway for a moment with his hand on the door of the Subaru, and he looked at me with an expression I am going to spend a lot of time thinking about. And he said, "Son, if you start finding things on your kitchen counter, small things, things you don't remember buying, call me. Don't write it down, don't photograph it, just call me." He went inside. I drove home. I parked. I went in through the back door. I made myself a sandwich because I hadn't eaten all day and my hands were shaking from low blood sugar. When I sat down at the kitchen table to eat, there was something on it that hadn't been there when I left. A small dish, white ceramic, the kind of dish you'd put a wedding ring on at the end of the day. The dish was empty, but the bottom of it on the inside had a faint circular mark, the kind of mark a metal ring leaves on glazed ceramic. The ring was not in the dish. The ring was somewhere else. I want to tell you how this ends, but I should warn you up front. It doesn't. Not in the way endings are supposed to work. Not in the way I would write it if I were making it up. I am writing this from my mother's kitchen, on a laptop she doesn't know I'm using, on a Tuesday morning in early May, which is roughly 7 weeks after the fire. My mother is at her quilting group. She will be home at 1. I have until then to finish, and I am going to finish, because I have decided that finishing is the last thing I get to do as myself, and I would like to do it well. I'll start with the dish. I left the dish on the kitchen table the night I came home from the fire, and I went to bed without touching it. I want to be clear about why. The line in the notebook had said, "If either of you keeps any of it, the second visit becomes the first one." I had read that line carefully. I had decided, standing in my kitchen with the dish in front of me, that the dish was not something I had kept. The dish had arrived. There is a difference, and I was going to insist on the difference. I slept that night badly, and in the morning the dish was still there. Empty. The faint circular mark on the inside still visible. I left it where it was. I made coffee around it. I ate breakfast around it. I treated it the way you treat a wasp that has landed on the table while you're eating, with steady, deliberate attention that pretends not to be attention. On the second day, there was a wedding ring in the dish. It was a plain gold band, men's size, slightly worn on the inside surface, the way rings get worn when they've been on a finger for a few years. I did not pick it up. I did not photograph it. I called Curtis. Curtis came over within the hour. He stood in my kitchen looking at the dish and he said very quietly, "Don't put it on." I said, "I wasn't going to." He said, "I know. I'm telling you anyway, because the part of you that wasn't going to is not going to be the only part of you for very much longer." I want to write down what he said next, exactly, because I have repeated it to myself almost every night since, and I am afraid that if I don't write it down soon, I will start remembering it differently. He said, "There's a man in that bunker who is wearing your shirt and writing in your notebook and waiting for you to catch up to him. Every day you exist out here without becoming him, he has to do more work to stay being you. He is borrowing things from your house to keep the costume current. The ring is not asking you to put it on, son. The ring is asking you to recognize that it already fits. That's a different question. And the answer to that question is the only thing you still own." I asked him how he knew that. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Because there's a woman in my house, in the spare bedroom, who has been there for 9 days. I have not gone in to see her. She knocks sometimes. She uses my late wife's voice. I have not opened the door. I am telling you this because I want you to know that I am not asking you to do anything I have not already been doing. And I am telling you because if I disappear in the next few weeks, I want one person in the world to know that I did not go willingly." I asked him if I could come stay at his house. He said no. He said it gently. He said, "We can't be in the same building, son. If we are in the same building, the building knows where to send the next ring." I understood what he meant. I wanted on the record that I understood, because everything I did after that, I did with full understanding. I left my apartment the next morning. I drove to my mother's. I told her I was between rentals, which she accepted because it was the kind of small lie a son tells a mother, and because she likes having me in the house. I have been here for 6 weeks. I have not been back to my apartment. I pay the rent through automatic transfer. The dish, as far as I know, is still on the kitchen table. I think about it sometimes. I do not let myself think about whether the ring is still in it or whether other things have arrived since. I want to describe what has happened in those 6 weeks because I need you to understand what kind of ending this is. In the first week, I started losing time. Not in large blocks, in small ones. 5 minutes here, 15 minutes there. I would be reading on the couch and look up and the light through the window would have changed, and my mother would walk in from the kitchen and ask if I'd heard the phone ring, and I would not have heard it. But the call log on her landline would show that I had answered it and spoken for 4 minutes. To whom, I don't know. She didn't ask me because she was being kind, and I didn't volunteer because I was being a coward. There are conversations I have had in the past 6 weeks that I have no memory of having, and I have not investigated any of them because the investigation is what the building is asking for. In the second week, my mother began commenting that I looked thinner. I didn't feel thinner. The scale said I was the same weight, but when I looked at photographs my mother took of the two of us on Easter Sunday, she takes a photograph every Easter. It's a tradition. The man in the photograph next to her was thinner than I am, slightly, not enough to alarm anyone but me. My face in the photograph was a few millimeters narrower at the jaw than it should have been, and the cheekbones were sharper. The shape of an older man who has lost a little weight. The shape, if I'm being honest, of the man at the folding table in room 7. I deleted the photograph from my mother's phone. I felt bad about it. I am telling you because I have decided I am done lying about what I have done. In the third week, Curtis stopped answering his phone. I drove to his house. The Forest Service jacket was hanging on the hook by his door. His coffee cup was in the sink, half full, the coffee still warm. The cedar chest in his garage was open, and the field notebooks from his 41 years of surveying were arranged on the workbench in chronological order, with the oldest on the left and the most recent on the right. And the most recent one was open to the last page he had written on. The last entry was dated the morning he stopped answering the phone. It read in his handwriting, "She came out. I went in. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him not to come looking." I have not gone looking. That is the part that has cost me the most. I want to be clear about that. Curtis LeMay was the closest thing to a grandfather I had as an adult, and the man was being eaten alive in the spare bedroom of his own house by a thing wearing his wife's voice, and when he asked me not to come looking, I honored it, because honoring it was the one thing I could still give him. I drove home from his house that day, and I sat in my mother's driveway for an hour before I went inside, because I did not want her to see my face. In the fourth week, I started writing this account. I am writing it on a laptop because I do not trust paper anymore. I am writing it under a separate user account on my mother's machine, one she doesn't know exists, because I do not trust my own devices. I am saving it to a single thumb drive that I keep in the inside pocket of my jacket, and I have not made a copy because the line in the notebook said if either of you keeps any of it. This is not any of it. This is something new. I wrote every word of it consciously, as myself, and I will know if any of it is changed because I have read every paragraph of it out loud to myself before saving. In the 5th week, I started finding things on the kitchen counter at my mother's house. The first was a receipt from a hardware store in Lewisburg, dated a week in the future, for a gallon of paint in a color called Quartermaster Green. The second was a key. Single key, brass, no fob, the kind of key that fits a steel utility door. The third, 3 days ago, was a folded sheet of grid paper with a coordinate circled on it. The coordinate is not sub-installation 4, it is a different one, about 40 miles away from the first one, in the same forest, on a ridge I have never been to. The handwriting on the grid paper is mine. I have had 6 weeks to think about it, and I would like to leave behind the most accurate guess I can make. The bunker is not a place, it's a process. It finds people who measure things. Appraisers, surveyors, the kind of people whose minds are organized around the recording of what is real, and uses the precision of their attention to draft a version of them that can be moved into the building and kept there. The first visit is the sketch. The second visit is the inking. The third visit, the one I have not made and will not make, is the signature. I think Curtis was further along in the process than I was, by years, and that the woman in his spare bedroom was the version of his late wife that the building had drafted for him, and that he held out for as long as he held out, and that what got him in the end was kindness. He went in because she sounded like she was suffering, and he could not stand to leave her in there alone. I think the version of me in room 7 is not the future. I think he is a draft that has been waiting patiently to be made permanent. I think every time I think about him, every time I picture him at the folding table in his green flannel shirt, I am adding ink to the drawing. I have stopped picturing him. I am trying, in this account, to describe him only in the past tense, only at the moments I actually saw him, and not to imagine what he's doing now. This is the hardest discipline I have ever attempted in my life. I am not certain I am succeeding. This is the part where I have to tell you what I am going to do next, and where I have to ask you to do something for me. I am going to finish this document. I am going to save it to the thumb drive. I am going to drive to a public library in a town where I have never had a card, and I am going to use a guest computer to email this account to 3 people: a journalist at a regional paper in Roanoke, a researcher at a university in Charlottesville who has written about anomalous land use in the George Washington forest, and one personal address belonging to a friend I have not spoken to in 11 years and who has no professional reason to be receiving this. I picked her because the building does not know her. I have not thought her name in this account, and I will not, and if you are reading this and you suspect you are her, I am sorry, and thank you. After I send those 3 emails, I am going to drive to my mother's, and I am going to leave the thumb drive on her kitchen table with a note that says, "Do not read this. Do not throw it away. Give it to the first person who comes to the door asking about a bunker." And then I'm going to sit in her living room and wait, because I do not want her to come home to an empty house, and because I would like the last thing I do as myself to be ordinary. I do not know what happens after that. I want to be honest about that. I have a guess. The guess is that one of 2 things happens. Either the building finds me anyway, in which case the man who answers my mother's door when she comes home will look like me and sound like me and will tell her I am fine, and she will believe him, because mothers believe their sons. And the version of me that is writing this will be in a folding chair in a room in the George Washington forest, in a green flannel shirt, waiting for the next visitor to walk down the hallway. Or the building does not find me, and I sit in my mother's living room, and she comes home, and we have lunch, and I keep finding things on the kitchen counter for the rest of my life, and I keep not putting them on. And Curtis's last note keeps being the last note he ever wrote, and the woman in his spare bedroom keeps knocking, and somewhere in the George Washington forest, a hallway with 7 doors keeps growing longer, slowly, waiting, the way a hallway like that has been growing longer since long before either of us was born. I do not know which of those 2 things is going to happen. I am writing this as if both of them are true, because in some sense both of them already are. If you are reading this, I would like you to do one thing for me. Do not look up the coordinate. Do not check the maps. Do not stand at the trailhead pull-out and look at the ridge and decide to walk in just to see for yourself. The building is patient. It can wait for you. It has been waiting for me since before I knew it existed, and the only reason it found me is that someone, a man named Curtis, who was good and who did not know what he was doing, handed me a folded piece of grid paper across his kitchen table, and I took it, and I went. Don't take it. If a folded piece of grid paper ever appears in your life, in any context from anyone, do not take it. Do not unfold it. Do not look at the coordinate. Burn it before sundown. Pour the ash into moving water. Do not keep any of it. And if a small white dish appears on your kitchen table that you do not remember owning, with a faint circular mark on the inside, leave the room. Leave the house. Don't come back. It's almost 1 o'clock. My mother will be home soon. I am going to save this document now and pull the thumb drive and put on my jacket. I can hear her car in the driveway already, which is strange because she is normally 15 minutes later than this on Tuesdays. The car door is closing. There are footsteps on the porch. The footsteps sound like hers. I want to believe they are. I am going to go to the door now and look through the peephole, and if it is her, I am going to open the door and have lunch with my mother, and if it is not, I am going to leave through the back, and either way this account ends here, because either way the version of me that wrote it does not get to write anymore. Whoever you are, whoever finds this, don't take the paper.